Hi again. My name is Harper Madeline Blue Duo. I am 19 years old and I'm from Canada. And today I want to talk to you about the global double burden of malnutrition. If I asked you to envision malnutrition right now, the very first thing that you're probably going to think of is someone who does not have enough food. But what if I told you that in today's modern world, malnutrition is more of the opposite? 3 billion people with a B are malnourished, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all hungry. In fact, 2 billion of those people go to bed every night probably feeling pretty full. Jonathan Sachs, a former member of the House of Lords in the UK, once said that close to 1 billion people are malnourished. 1 billion people are starving. Yet this is coming at a time when doctors in the UK are warning of obesity. We are eating too much while others starve. This phenomenon is especially true of low-income communities across the world and has created and exacerbated an issue known as the global double burden of malnutrition. This is because starvation and obesity are just two sides of the same problem. They're both, albeit extreme, consequences of malnutrition. Whereas starvation and undernourishment is more commonly associated as being a disease of malnutrition, overnourishment and hence obesity is often overlooked as a disease of malnutrition, despite being exactly that. One common misconception is that obesity is localized to high-income countries, such as my home country of Canada, and that starvation and undernourishment is only found in low-income countries, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, such as Eswatini, where we are today. Although this does hold some water, and I'm not saying it's entirely false, it is pertinent to mention that a 2023 study discovered that 8.7 million Canadians, that's almost a quarter of the Canadian population, did not know where their next meal was coming from. Another 2023 study, done by the Global Nutrition Report, discovered that close to 36% of Eswatini's adult population could be classified as obese. A recent report by the World Food Committee on Food Security argues that malnutrition in all its forms, not only hunger, but micronutrient deficiencies as well as obesity, are critical challenges, not just in the developing world, but developed countries as well. And hence, solving malnutrition requires a better understanding of the determinants and processes that influence diets. We must work to ensure equal focus on an adequate supply of food, but also on the quality of that food that we are supplying. I could stand here for the rest of my allocated time and discuss to you the various consequences of malnutrition, where diseases such as atherosclerosis and kwashiorkor affect both young children and elderly populations alike. But what I really want to do today is address the root issue of that malnutrition, which I'm arguing is too many choices. These choices are caused by an issue of overproduction. We are producing a crazy amount of food, almost 4 billion tons of food each year. But of those 4 billion tons, 1/3 of that just gets thrown away. Imagine if every third meal you had, someone just picked it up and threw it away. The issue of overproduction is found in every corner of the world. In today's world, we have cattle grazing on what used to be parts of the Amazon rainforest. Yet in those parts that have not yet been torn down to make way for more beef farming, we have people living in hunger. And even just driving through central Eswatini, locals say that you can smell the chicken farms from hundreds of meters away, where 30,000 chickens are slaughtered monthly. This is the same Eswatini where approximately 56% of the population is food insecure. This phenomenon, as described by Renee Protter, the Associate Dean of Curriculum of Edward University, argues that all of these choices from all the food that we are producing contributes to exacerbating one end of the global double burden of malnutrition. This is because, she argues, if you have a bunch of options compared to communities of people which have little to no options, it's more likely that those of us with the choices won't even make a choice, because we'll just have all of it. Although this does sound like unconventional reasoning behind the global double burden of malnutrition, if I think about it in the context of my own life, it does kind of make sense. For example, if I go to one of those hotels with those like all-inclusive buffet breakfasts, I'm not just gonna get one bowl of yogurt and call it a day. I'm going to get everything because I have the choice to. And even if you just go to the grocery store and you see there's a 2-for-1 sale on a bag of chips, of course you're gonna get both, even if that's not what you came for. But this illusion of choice is especially true of cheaper, more processed, but equally more accessible foods. Let's take McDonald's, for example. In 1950, McDonald's only had 9 items on their menu. Yet by 2007, that number had risen to 85. And then again, by 2014, that number was 145. And 2014 was still 10 years ago, so I'm sure that number has grown since then. They also have a lot of chicken on their menu, and for the purposes of this talk, that's what I'm going to be focusing on. They have chicken in so many various forms. These are usually broiler chickens. They're hatched, they're brought to a large enclosure, and they're pumped with steroids and hormones in order to grow bigger and fatter, so much so that these chickens cannot even support the weight of their own bodies. These chickens only live for 9 weeks, but during those 9 weeks, they're enclosed in derelict, cramped conditions, which means that they must be pumped with antibiotics, simply to not die. When that chicken is finally ready to be sent to make your McChicken burger, only some of it is used. The rest, it just gets thrown away. It just goes to waste, exacerbating this global double burden of malnutrition because the options that you have on that McDonald's menu are not necessarily the healthiest, but the majority of that food is not accessible to anybody. But okay, arguably having too many choices is not always a bad thing. Let's take the produce aisle, for example. When I go to Pick n Pay, the local Southern African grocery chain, I have so many options just within the apples alone. You have your Starking, your Honey Golden, your Granny Smith apples, just to name a few. But I always see these apples at Pick n Pay, regardless of the time of year, which means that for half of the year, they probably have to be imported from somewhere else. But that's fine, I guess, because we still have the choice, right? Because these apples are labeled as organic and healthy. To prove this, they're waxed in order to be shinier, they're genetically modified in order to be bigger and juicier, and they're artificially selected for the biggest and the juiciest apples. And recently, as many scientists and nutritionists alike are now warning of, they're also pumped with harmful chemicals in order to act as pesticides, but as well to artificially ripen. Nutritionist Arati Shah discovered that in bananas, papayas, and yes, apples, there was traces of calcium carbonate. This doesn't sound that bad, but calcium carbonate is one of the same chemicals used in the manufacturing process of fireworks. But what happens to those apples that are labeled as bad? Researchers at UBC discovered that these apples are just thrown away. Even when they have the most superficial blemishes, they're rejected by supermarkets, which exacerbates this global double burden of malnutrition, as those apples that those of us affluent enough to be able to afford are not necessarily as healthy as they were 100 years ago. But the majority of that food can't access anybody. The paradoxical nature of the overabundance of food means that you cannot necessarily escape the cycle simply by switching to a healthier option. The question just becomes, which cycle would you rather contribute to? Buying an apple at Pick n Pay, which was specifically selected, and whose brothers and sisters were sent to an incinerator or fed to pigs, which, for the double burden of malnutrition, is arguably equally as bad as that McDonald's chicken you bought. However, this also creates another side of malnutrition, a side that inspired this talk for me today. For years, I suffered from an eating disorder, and although there were a myriad of factors that went into this, one factor that I think most people here can relate to today, regardless of if you've suffered from an eating disorder, is all of the options we get, yet all of the ways in which we're told how to eat. When you go to a store, you're given rows and rows of carbs and bread, yet we have people telling us that we shouldn't eat carbs and we shouldn't eat bread because they're all bad for us. But instead, we should look for the healthier option. But then we're given so many healthier options. It's so much. We're told we shouldn't eat ice cream, even if it's a hot, sunny day and we're with our friends at the beach, because it's unhealthy. So instead, we should look for the low-fat yogurt as a substitute. But we should also make sure that it's organic, that it's healthy, that it has low calories, make sure it's Greek. There's just so many ways of eating, yet so many options. It's exhausting. One of society's greatest achievements is being able to produce enough food for everybody. Yet by the time we have gotten to this point, we restrict ourselves from being nourished because of our own expectations. Being able to eat whatever is a luxury, and we take it for granted. However, the double burden of malnutrition is most commonly found in communities who do not have the ability to speak on their situation. Sure, we can villainize the people, such as myself, who make decisions which contribute to the exacerbation of this double burden. But what about those people that don't have a choice? Raj Patel, author of the book Stuffed and Starved, discusses an issue which he colloquially refers to as the perversity of the way our food comes to us. That perversity being the fact that now obesity is more associated with poverty. Think about how strange that is. A disease caused by an overabundance, an affluence, an excess of food is most commonly found in communities of people who do not even make enough to support themselves. When discussing this issue with a nutritionist in the townships of Cape Town, South Africa, she made a very good point to me. She told me that she sees children who grow up malnourished become obese as adults as a result of that childhood malnutrition. This is because their bodies, not being able to store food properly, are more likely to store that poor quality food that they can access as fat, hence exacerbating this global double burden of malnutrition in the lowest income communities, those that don't have a choice over their own health. The idea today behind Sparking Momentum is that once initial progress is made or a positive outcome has been achieved, it can create a ripple effect, propelling a further cycle of success. It's often seen as a powerful tool for reinforcing and achieving goals and building barriers. Today, I want to encourage everybody here not only to make better decisions about what you eat, but how you eat, and to be more conscious of those decisions. Because a black and white world where we believe that the fast food chicken is bad and the supermarket apples are good is not the way that we're going to solve the issue of the double burden of malnutrition. We must work to feed the hungry, yes, but we also must work to reduce our own pickiness. The apples with blemishes on them, and the chicken that doesn't necessarily look like the one advertised on the billboard. As I've discussed, this issue of the illusion of choice in supermarkets contributes to exacerbating this double burden. However, there are companies aimed at breaking this illusion. For example, in the UK, a more non-traditional way of grocery shopping has been introduced, where customers can purchase supermarket rejects at reduced prices in order to combat the issue of supermarket waste, but also to make produce available to communities of people who might otherwise not be able to afford it. And back home, I worked for an international slow food movement, which aimed to educate consumers about where their food was coming from and encourage more direct and holistic, slow choices, straight from farm to table. As malnutrition is very obviously linked with changes to the global food system, that is where we must start in order to reduce its prevalence. And being at a United World College, it is pertinent that we do so by raising awareness through collective action. We have people from high-income countries, people from low-income countries, and people that are suffering because of this themselves. I hope today you have learned that your choice really does matter, and you have the ability to have agency over your own health. Because when we work together, we have the ability to create a better global food system for the double burden of malnutrition, but also for ourselves. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.